2022 has arrived. Today we're going to talk about 3 potential sports card buying strategies for the new year. Stick around. Hello to all my sports card collector, investor, all of my collectibles friends out there in the universe. How is everybody doing? We have hit the new year. Have you been sticking to your resolutions? Are you already off of them? I am hanging on by a thread to my diet. My wife made pineapple upside down cake today, which was definitely an issue, but I stayed away from it, so we should be okay. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. Connect with me on IG at The Personal Finance Dad or on Twitter at The Personal Finance Dad. All right, let's dig into this. The sports card landscape has changed. It is not 2020 anymore. It's not 2021. It's 2022. And we don't know what we're going to see from a pricing standpoint. But one thing, of course, that we've seen along the way is that the more common, the more base type cards have certainly gone down in price. Folks are moving more towards parallels, scarcity, rarity, etc. The first strategy I want to talk about is buying all the other grading companies. And what do I mean by that? Well, PSA is number 1 in the land, and it looks like nothing is really changing on that front anytime soon. They've had a huge infusion of cash from Nat Turner and his group as they purchased the company, and they're rolling along. They've hired a zillion people, and they're increasing capacity. There's tens of thousands of graded cards that are going out weekly. It's wild, but PSA is really driving the ship at this point. They are number 1 in the grading space in terms of volume and resale value. Will that change down the line? Maybe, maybe not. But one way to hedge against one company, if you don't want all your eggs in one basket, is to buy the other big 3, as we maybe would say, and that would be CSG, BGS, and SGC. An example of this for me is I have a 2000 Bowman paper rookie, Tom Brady paper rookie, and a CSG 7.5. And you might be wondering, why would you bother with a CSG 7.5 for a modern card? Well, CSG is known to be a tough grading company. They're fairly new in the space, and they are not giving out easy grades. And so for me, a lower grade CSG could very well be the equivalent of a PSA 8 or maybe a BGS 8 or whatever. The point is, for a lot of cards, they're grading as strict or more strict than PSA. And that matters to me because, again, you hear kind of buy the card, not the grade, or buy the card, not the case. But the reality is that all of those things matter. They just matter on the resale value side of things. And so I am okay with buying those other big companies. I do the same thing, I guess you could say kind of the same thing in cryptocurrency as a hedge against Ethereum. I'll buy, Polygon or Sol or Cardano, for example. And there's other options out there as well. Those are kind of the more established ones, but that's a hedge against ETH. And I have ETH as well, but that's just kind of the hedge against the main one that's being used because we don't know what's coming down the road. PSA might be number 1. CSG might be number 1. We have no idea what it's going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, etc. And so if the same cards in a PSA slab are selling for a much higher premium than some of the other ones, the other big companies in the space that really are doing good work, I have to look at that. I have to take a closer look at it. Next up, buying vintage Hall of Famers. Not necessarily GOATs, though. So if you look at between the big 3 sports, football, baseball, basketball, so many options if you go into the vintage space. And of course, you can look at Mickey Mantle and Michael Jordan, but there are so many other options out there that are just Hall of Fame players. On the baseball side, there's many, many, many. I mean, it's a long, long list. Some good channels that I watch for this sort of thing. Baseball Collector. Mike does a good job. He is mainly a vintage baseball card collector. He talks through this stuff. Silver Jackify Joe, another good channel that I watch for vintage baseball and modern baseball, but a lot of vintage baseball stuff. So there's so many different options there on the Hall of Fame side. Basketball has iconic legends like Dr. J, Julius Erving, and Jerry West, and these are not considered GOATs, but these are all-time players. And Jerry West is the logo man, and there's genuine scarcity within the vintage space. And don't even get me started on football cards. For whatever reason, there's a huge drop-off between baseball and basketball vintage and vintage football cards. in a lot of cases. Not all of them, but in a lot of cases, vintage football cards are just not collected in the same way as those other two. And so I'm big on the vintage football space, football cards in general, and I think there could be some good values there. And then if you're less interested in kind of the big three sports, you also have vintage hockey, you have vintage soccer, vintage F1. I'm sure there's some F1 stuff, with F1 kind of getting all the craze lately.
Prepare to qualify.
Are there vintage F1 cards of interest? That's what I would be wondering. The vintage space in general, Hall of Famers. All right, and lastly, rare inserts. So we think about kind of the late 90s as kind of how this all got started with insert cards, a lot of upper deck. A lot of love goes out to the PMGs, of the world, the late 90s, jambalayas and the PMGs, etc. But there are so many different inserts kind of in the late 80s and then going into the 2000s. Really, really cool stuff. And it's fun to kind of chase after the rare kind of the pack hit, the case hits, if you will. You can look at a lot of times on the box, it'll say like 1 out of 200 packs or 1 out of 100 packs. And then you can look at the checklist and it's like, oh wow, there's 40 players and there's 1 out of 100 packs. So how likely are you to get a Ken Griffey Jr. of this particular card, for example? Rare inserts can be really, really fun. It can be nostalgic because a lot of times people will go back to the sets that when they were young, they were trying to buy the packs to be able to pull these inserts, or maybe, these were cards that were way out of their price range or not even on their radar because they were so scarce when they were young. And so this is an opportunity for them to kind of, get in the game now that they're older, have disposable income, etc. So looking back and researching those types of things, and it's again across all sports, baseball, basketball, football, hockey. I don't know as much on the soccer F1 side, but the big four sports there, there's certainly a lot of options on the rare insert side. And then when you factor in condition scarcity, it just adds another layer of fun. And then of course, grading company, which grading company to go with. There's so much nuance to all this stuff, as we always talk about. So much nuance in collectibles in general. And so I want to hear what your buying strategy is in 2022. Are you focused on specific players, sets, inserts, rookie cards, vintage, ultra modern, prospecting? What are you looking to do here in 2022? I would be interested in hearing it. And maybe how is it different from what you were doing in 2021? Guys, thank you very much for joining me here today. I hope that you have an awesome rest of your day. Stay healthy, stay awesome, and I will talk to you again later.